The Holocaust. Under the regime of Nazi Germany, millions of people were systematically targeted and removed from society based on their ethnicity, religion, or perceived affiliations. The Jewish population of Europe was especially affected, with approximately 6 million lives lost through forced relocation, confinement, and inhumane treatment. Other groups, such as Roma, people with disabilities, and political dissidents, also suffered under similar policies. Facilities were constructed solely for the purpose of mass processing and disposal, leaving a historical record of one of the most industrialized campaigns of human suffering ever recorded. This operation extended across occupied Europe, with an extensive network of camps, ghettos, and transport systems that dehumanized people at every step. The Nanking Massacre. When Imperial Japanese forces captured the Chinese city of Nanking, they carried out a 6-week campaign marked by extreme brutality towards civilians and captured personnel. Tens of thousands lost their lives in public displays intended to instill fear and control. Numerous eyewitness accounts and documented testimonies reveal that entire neighborhoods were subjected to widespread abuse. Families were torn apart, and many survivors carried psychological scars for life. Despite efforts by a few foreign nationals to create safe zones, the scale and severity of what occurred earned it lasting infamy as one of the darkest moments in East Asian history. The Cambodian Purge. Led by the Khmer Rouge under Pol Pot, Cambodia underwent a devastating transformation. In pursuit of a radical agrarian society, the regime emptied cities, abolished currency, and forcibly relocated millions into rural labor camps. Intellectuals, minorities, and even those wearing glasses were considered enemies. An estimated 2 million lives were lost due to starvation, overwork, untreated illness, and direct targeting. Conditions in these camps were brutal, with forced confessions, lack of medical care, and widespread malnutrition being common. Many were held at sites that would later be called fields of silence, where they disappeared without trace, often buried in mass, unmarked locations. Armenian Tragedy. During World War I, the Ottoman Empire carried out a mass removal of its Armenian population. Many were sent on forced marches through harsh terrain without supplies, leading to widespread loss of life. Others were taken to isolated locations and never seen again. Modern scholars and numerous governments recognize this event as an orchestrated campaign against an ethnic group. Eyewitnesses reported scenes of entire caravans collapsing from thirst and exhaustion. However, political disagreements persist around the terminology and classification of these events, even over a century later. Efforts at global recognition have been met with both support and denial. Srebrenica Massacre. In the aftermath of Yugoslavia's disintegration, ethnic tensions boiled over. The town of Srebrenica had been designated a United Nations safe zone, but was overrun by Bosnian Serb forces. Over 8,000 men and boys were separated from their families and systematically removed. Despite the presence of international peacekeepers, very little was done to stop the unfolding tragedy. Years later, this event would become one of the few in Europe officially recognized as an ethnic cleansing act by international courts. The operation was methodically planned, with buses used to transport victims and bulldozers employed in concealment efforts. Human experimentation in Manchuria. Imperial Japan operated a covert research unit in occupied China known as Unit 731. Under the guise of scientific advancement, human subjects were exposed to biological agents, extreme temperatures, and other controlled conditions to test endurance and responses. Survivors were rare, and documentation reveals a level of cruelty that has shocked historians. The experiments included weapon tests and exposure to epidemic diseases, often without anesthesia or consent. After the war, most involved avoided prosecution in exchange for handing over their data, a decision that remains controversial to this day. Bombing of Dresden. Toward the end of World War II, Allied forces launched a major aerial campaign against the German city of Dresden. Over the course of several days, the city was engulfed in flames, with tens of thousands of civilians perishing. While the attack was part of a broader military strategy, the scale of the destruction and the city's limited strategic value have sparked debates among historians. Civilian structures, including historic landmarks and hospitals, were reduced to rubble. Critics argue it blurred the line between combat action and collective punishment, especially since Dresden held little military significance. Gaza Conflict. Since October 2023, the latest war between Israel and Hamas has resulted in one of the most devastating humanitarian crises in modern history. According to the United Nations, widespread civilian harm has been reported, including airstrikes on densely populated areas, schools, and aid distribution points. A June 2025 UN report accused Israeli forces of actions amounting to crimes against humanity, citing extermination due to the scale of civilian deaths and destruction of infrastructure. Over 50,000 children have been either killed or injured. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Israeli officials, including the Prime Minister and former Defense Minister, accusing them of using starvation as a weapon of war and deliberately targeting civilians. Strikes near food aid centers and shelters have resulted in mass casualties, and several human rights organizations report that medical facilities and humanitarian corridors have been systematically restricted or attacked. While Israel maintains that it targets only militant infrastructure embedded in civilian zones, international investigators have documented consistent patterns of civilian harm. The debate over proportionality, legitimacy, and accountability remains ongoing, with mounting global pressure for an independent legal resolution. The My Lai Incident. During the Vietnam War, American soldiers entered the village of My Lai in search of enemy combatants. Over several hours, hundreds of non-combatants were killed. Women, children, and the elderly were among the victims. The event was initially covered up, but later investigations led to one soldier being convicted, though his sentence was quickly reduced. The incident sparked international outrage and became symbolic of the moral challenges and accountability issues faced during the conflict. It remains one of the most infamous examples of military misconduct in modern U.S. history. Rwandan Tragedy. In a span of 100 days, Rwanda experienced one of the fastest-moving mass violence events in modern history. Following the assassination of the country's president, extremist factions called upon citizens to take part in a coordinated purge of the Tutsi population. Entire communities were targeted using basic weapons and intimidation. International response was slow and inadequate, with peacekeeping forces unable to intervene effectively. Close to 800,000 lives were lost before the situation was brought under control. Neighbor turned against neighbor, and local media was used to incite further division. The Bataan March. Following the surrender of American and Filipino forces in the Philippines during World War II, tens of thousands of prisoners were forced to march over 100 kilometers with little food or water. Those who collapsed or slowed down were removed. The tropical heat, coupled with physical abuse from guards, resulted in a death toll estimated in the thousands. Survivors reported inhumane conditions, forced exposure to the elements, and the denial of basic medical care. The event was later classified as a war crime during post-war trials and remains a key chapter in the Pacific Theater. Darfur Conflict. In the western region of Sudan, a violent campaign unfolded involving government-backed militias and rebel groups. Civilians bore the brunt of the conflict. Villages were burned, and entire populations were displaced. Humanitarian agencies documented patterns of abuse that led to international outcry. Although attempts have been made to bring those responsible to justice, instability and lack of enforcement continue to challenge accountability. Camps for displaced persons remain overcrowded, and access to aid is frequently obstructed.